Good afternoon. Today is lesson 33, and it is about rounding, numbers, and estimating. Rounding, numbers, and estimating. Now this is a key that when you can get it understood in your head, it will make life a lot easier in math, because this is something that you can do to check answers. You can do things to figure out things quickly in a store if you have enough money by rounding and estimating your total. So this is an important skill that we'll work on and get some visual ideas in your head, and then hopefully it'll make a lot more sense as we move on through math. Okay, you see in front of you a number line. You do not need to copy this number line down. I'm just going to be using it to explain a few things so you have something to look at while we're talking about it. So do not copy this number line. Just take a look at what we're doing and get a good picture of it in your head. So that'll make it easier for you to see what we're going to do later. Now, excuse me. When we round a number, in this case, we're going to be looking at tens, and we're going to round to the nearest tens. Now, that could mean rounding it to 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Notice they all have the 0 in the second digit, well, the ones place. So when we round to the nearest tens, everything smaller than a 10 would turn into a 0. So if I said, I've got $66. Approximately round it to my nearest tens. What would you say? If you look at it, you can tell me, are you closer to the 60 or to the 70? Well, hopefully by looking at that right away, you said, well, I'm on the past the 5. Now the 5 is your magic number. The 5 is the number where you then fall to the bigger. So once you hit 5, you would round up. If you're less than 5, you would round down. So that 5 is very important and is key to it. If I were to say I had 81 pieces of candy, approximately how many pieces of candy do I have, or round that number to the nearest tens? Well, there again, take a look at your magic. 5. Have I reached the 5 point yet? Nope. So it rounds to 80 because it is before the 5. So let's write that down. And if I wrote down 81 and put after that to the nearest tens place. Here's what I do. I mark the place that it wants me to round to. So here it was tens. I'm going to mark my tens place. Then I look at this next number and say, is it 5 or greater? If it's 5 or greater, I would go up to 90. So this number goes up. If I haven't made it to the 5, then this number stays the same. So you're looking at marking what they tell you to round to, the place value, and then look at the next number. Let's do a couple just to make sure that you're on the right track now that you've seen it with a number line and seen it with a number. So let's really quick take a look at, we'll just do 4. Write down for me 52. So rounding it to the nearest tens, you would say, well, there's my tens place. Is that enough to bump me up? No. So 52 would round to 50. Because that 2 isn't enough to bump up my 5. All right, how about 46? Rounded to the nearest tens. Well, rounded to the nearest tens mean I'm going to look at my tens place. Mark my tens, look at the next number. Is the 6 enough to bump me up? Yes. So 46 would round to 50. Let's try again adding a digit. So if we said 137, rounded to the nearest tens, mark my digit. Now everything on this side of that number, let me actually erase that, everything on this side of that one number is going to change to a 0. When I'm rounding to the nearest tens, my ones place is going to go to a 0. So rounded to my nearest tens, well, mark my 3 as my tens. Is 7 enough to bump me up? Yes. So this number stays the same. The 3 bumps up, and the last number turns to a 0. So do you see how we're looking at the place value, and then the next one tells me if it's enough to bump me up. Now let's try one more. And what if we said 1,469 rounded to the nearest 100? Am I going to underline my 6? Hopefully in your head you screamed out, no! Good, because this is round to the nearest 100. Everything over here will turn into zeros, but I'm going to look at this number right here. Is the 6 enough to bump me up? It certainly is. So my 1 stays the same, my 4 bumps to a 5, and everything else goes to 0. Because I'm rounding to the nearest 100. Hundreds place, everything else was 0. Rounding to the nearest 10. Tens place, everything else 0. Nearest 10, tens place, everything 0. Nearest 10, tens place, everything 0. So hopefully you're seeing how that rounding is going to work. Go to the place that it wants you to round to. Look at the next number. Is it enough to bump it up? Yes or no, and then everything else turns to 0 except what's in front of that place value. Now the last thing I want to look at today is estimating. So for example, if I have 27 students and each student has 5 pieces of candy, how many pieces of candy do all of my students have? Well, I could take the time to go 27 times 5, 5 times 7, 35, carry, blah, blah, blah. All that. I don't really want to. That's too much work. I'm going to estimate because it said approximately how many pieces of candy do my students have. If it doesn't use the word approximately or estimate, then you have to figure it out the long way. But it said approximately how many pieces of candy do my students have. Well, 27, what can I round that to? Remember, you want to get rid of and get as many zeros as possible. So I would round my 27 to 30. 30 times 5, well, you guys know this trick. All I have to do is say 3 times 5 is 15. Add my extra 0. My kids have approximately 150 pieces of candy. If we do a play here at school and I have 287 people coming and we have 3 performances, how many people approximately are we having for all of the performances together? Well, I don't want to do the long one, and they said approximately or estimate. So I would say, well, what can I do with this? 287. I can round it to 300. Remember, I want to go to my highest value. Just like up here we went to the 2. I want to go to my highest value to round. 8 bumps it up, so that's all going to turn into zeros. Times 3. Well, that's quick. 3 times 3 is 9, and there's 2 zeros after it. We'll have approximately 900 people at our performances. Are you seeing how this rounding and estimating make things move a lot faster when you're getting an approximate answer? So that's why rounding and estimating are both very, very important to know how to do. Now, just to finish up, I want you to jot down a couple terms that we're going to talk about tomorrow. First is rounding. And we're going to review tomorrow what those steps are. So leave a little bit of space after that. The next word you can write down is estimate. Hopefully in your head you could probably come up with an answer, a definition for what it means to estimate. Then the last thing I want you to write down is compatible numbers. Compatible numbers. Now, we will talk about these tomorrow. These are one of those things that some of you are going to be no problem, and others of you are going to go, I don't quite get it. That's okay if you don't quite get it. It's still something we'll talk about a little bit, but we'll talk about it when we're together and do a little practicing. So make sure you have those 3 terms written. We're going to talk about the steps for rounding, what actually an estimate is, and then working with compatible numbers tomorrow. Have a fabulous evening. I will see you mañana.